Throughout time, people across the world told each other tales of how they came to be, of heroes and monsters, romance and tragedy, death and rebirth. Mythology helped shape the ancient world, explaining the unexplainable. This is Mythology Unleashed.
Long ago, there lived an old man and woman. They were peasants and had to work hard to earn their daily rice. The old man used to go and cut grass and wood for the farmers of the area, while his wife did the work of the house and worked in their own little rice field. A peaceful life, yet one filled with sorrow, not because of their workload or social status, but because they never had a child of their own, though they had wanted to be parents for longer than either of them could remember. One day, the old man went to the hills as usual to cut grass and wood, and the old woman took some clothes to the river to wash. It was nearly summer, and the country was very beautiful to see in its fresh greenness, as the two old people went on their way to work. The breeze blew and ruffled the smooth surface of the water into wavelets, and touched the cheeks of the old couple who, for some reason, they felt very, very happy that morning. The old woman found a nice spot by the river bank. As she was busy with her laundry, a great peach came bumping down the stream. In all her 60 years, she had never seen such a big peach as this. She stretched out her arm and took it up in her hands. The old woman was delighted. She could not go on with her work, so happy and excited. So she put all of her clothes back in the basket, and she made her way home. The old man at last came back as the sun was setting, and his wife eagerly showed him the peach, which was somehow even heavier than before. He brought out the kitchen knife, and placing the peach on a board, was about to cut it when, wonderful to tell, the peach split itself in two, and out stepped a beautiful little child. The old man and his wife were both so astonished at what they had seen that they fell to the ground. The child spoke to them, telling them not to be afraid, for he was no demon or fairy. Heaven had compassion on the old couple. Every day and every night they had lamented that they had no child, but their cry had finally been heard, and he was sent to be their son. On hearing this, the old man and his wife were incredibly happy. Their prayer had been answered at long last. They were so lost with joy they did not know where to put their hands or their feet. First the old man took the child up in his arms, and then the old woman did the same, and they named him Momotaro, or Peach Boy. 15 years had passed, and Momotaro grew into a fine young lad. He was taller and far stronger than any other boys of his own age. He had a handsome face and a heart full of courage, and he was very wise for his years. The old couple's pleasure was great whenever they looked upon him, for he was just what they thought a hero ought to be like. One day, Momotaro came to his foster father and thanked him profusely for all his adoptive parents had done for him. Sensing something, the old man asked Momotaro what the reason for this was, so the Peach Boy went on to explain. Far and away to the northeast of Japan was an island in the sea called Onigashima. This island was the stronghold of a band of monsters called the Oni. Momotaro had often heard how they pillage the land, kill and rob the people, and carry off all that they could find. They were also cannibals, for they kill and eat some of the poor people who are so unfortunate as to fall into their hands. These devils were very hateful beings. and Momotaro was determined to go and conquer them, and bring back all the plunder of which they had robbed the land. The old man was very much surprised at hearing all of this from a mere boy of 15. He thought it best to let the boy go. He was strong and fearless, and besides all this, the old man knew he was no common child, for he had been sent to them as a gift from heaven, and he felt quite sure that the Oni would be powerless to harm him. The old man and woman at once set to work in the kitchen to make kibidongo, millet dumplings, for Momotaro to take with him on his journey. After filling his pack and sharing a heartfelt goodbye with his foster parents, Momotaro hurried on his way till it was midday. He began to feel hungry, so he opened his bag and took out one of the millet dumplings, and sat down under a tree by the side of the road to eat. While he was having his lunch, a large dog came running out from the high grass. It made straight for Momotaro, baring his teeth, and he fiercely chastised Momotaro for passing his field without permission. The dog then told Momotaro to hand over all of the kibidongo in his bag. Should he do so, then he may pass. Otherwise, he would kill him. Momotaro laughed, and proceeded to tell the territorial dog just who he was, and of his noble mission to vanquish the Oni stronghold. The dog's manner at once changed. His tail dropped between his legs, and coming near, he bowed so low that his forehead touched the ground. The dog had heard of Momotaro's strength and wisdom, and begged forgiveness, and the opportunity to join the Peach Boy on his journey. Momotaro allowed, and even gave the dog one of his dumplings. As they were going along, a monkey came down from a tree a little ahead of them. The monkey approached Momotaro, and told him that he is welcome in this part of the country, so long as he allowed him to go with them to the island of the Onis. The dog jealously began to bark at the primate. What use is a monkey when Momotaro already has a dog in his company? The dog and the monkey began to quarrel and bite, for these two animals always hate each other. Momotaro put himself between the two and, admiring the monkey's courage, allowed him to join them. He gave the primate a piece of dumpling, and the trio was off. By and by the trio came to a large field, where a pheasant flew down and alighted on the ground just in front of the little party. It was the most beautiful bird Momotaro had ever seen. On its body were 5 different robes of feathers, and its head was covered with a scarlet cap. The dog at once ran at the pheasant and tried to kill it, but the bird struck out its spurs and flew at the dog's tail, and the fight went hard with both. The Peach Boy went up to the two combatants and, holding the dog back, told the bird to surrender at once, and he will allow him to join their company. Otherwise, he would set the dog to bite his head off. The pheasant surrendered at once, and begged to be taken into Momotaro's company. So the pheasant was made a member of Momotaro's suite, and received a dumpling. Momotaro's companions began to bicker with one another, but he reminded them that the first thing necessary in an army is harmony. It is no easy thing to subdue an enemy when they quarrel with one another. From that moment on, the dog, monkey, and pheasant promised not to quarrel. Momotaro's influence was so great that the 3 became good friends, and hurried onwards with him as their leader. Hurrying on day after day, they at last came upon the shore of the northeastern sea. There was nothing to be seen as far as the horizon, no sign of any island. All that broke the stillness was the rolling of the waves upon the shore. Momotaro now got a small vessel, and they all got on board. The wind and weather were fair, and the small ship went like an arrow over the sea. It was the first time any of them had been out on the water, and so at first the dog, monkey, and pheasant were frightened at the waves and the rolling of the vessel. But by degrees, they grew accustomed to the water, and were quite happy again. As the wind blew in their favor, the ship made a quick voyage, and one day when the sun was shining brightly, a sight of land rewarded the 4 watchers at the bow, and Momotaro knew at once that what they saw was the Oni's stronghold. On the top of the precipitous shore was a large castle looking out to sea. This was the lair of the Oni. Now that his enterprise was close at hand, he was deep in thought with his head leaning on his hands, wondering how he should begin the attack. His 3 followers watched him, waiting for orders. At last, he called to the pheasant to engage the Oni from above. So the pheasant flew off and taunted the demons from the air, goading them into rage. In the meantime, Momotaro and the rest of his companions had found their way into the castle and joined the fray. Momotaro's onslaught was so furious that the Oni could not stand against him. At first their foe had been a single bird, but now that Momotaro and the dog and monkey had joined the fray, they were bewildered, for the 4 enemies fought like 100, so strong were they. Some of the monsters fell from the parapet of the castle, and were dashed to pieces on the rocks below. Others fell into the sea and were drowned, and many others were beaten to death by Momotaro and the 3 animals. The fighting continued until the leader of the Oni was the only one left. He had made up his mind to surrender, for he knew that his enemy was stronger than any mortal man. He came up humbly to Momotaro, threw down his iron bar, and kneeling down at the victor's feet, he broke off the horns on his head in token of submission. Momotaro tied the Oni chief up and threw him into the monkey's charge. Having done this, he went into all the rooms of the castle and gathered together all the treasure he could find. There were caps and coats that made their wearers invisible, jewels that governed the ebb and flow of the tide, coral, musk, emeralds, amber, and tortoiseshell, alongside gold and silver. The animals carried home the plunder, and thus Momotaro returned triumphantly to his home. The whole country made a hero of Momotaro, and rejoiced that the country was now freed from the terrible Oni, who had been a terror of the land for so long, longer than any could remember. The old couple's joy was greater than ever, and the treasure Momotaro had brought home with him enabled them to live in peace and plenty to the end of their days.